Don't miss today. One of the premier M&A attorneys is going to tell us how to prepare your business for the best possible exit.
During the process, don't feel compelled to agree to things without talking it over with your advisors. One of the things we say all the time is do not sign a letter of intent, an LOI, MOU, whatever you want to call it, before you have your M&A lawyer look at it. Deals have their own cadence to them, and they're often very choppy. So I would counsel, seller clients that, kind of expect the unexpected.
Welcome to Decision Points. I'm Doug Hudson.
I'm Scott Wood.
And today's guest is Shane Egan. Shane, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for making time. What's going on in your world?
Just, busy market right now. Just trying to keep all the plates in the air.
Why is the market so busy?
People, I think, see opportunity, value. So good stretch. And we've got one client in particular that's extremely busy.
Keeping you busy.
So that helps. Yeah.
Have things picked up as the years progress? Because I feel like things were a little quieter at the beginning of the year.
They have been, and I think they, with a lot of our clients, they still are. We're just very fortunate that we have a client that's extremely active on the mergers and acquisitions. So, and we'll take it. I'm hearing that things are, in the broader market are still kind of slow.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Where were you raised?
Well, don't hold this against me.
100%. Well, now we really want to know.
Orange County, California.
Oh.
Till I was about 11. Then I lived in London for a few years. And then I've lived most of my life now in Texas. I consider myself a Texan.
You're a Texan.
I'm glad I got here as soon as I could.
Can you surf?
No.
All right,
no.
All right.
Skateboard?
Years ago, yes.
Okay.
I haven't tried in a very, very long
That's probably good.
Yeah.
Yes,
it is.
Do you own a hoodie?
I do.
Okay,
maybe
all right.
one. Yeah. That my wife bought for me.
I can't surf either, but I love to. He can, and I have a couple.
Really? I wish I could.
It's fun. It's hard to surf in Dallas. It's hard to get proficient in Dallas. So I'm not super proficient, but I do enjoy it.
Go to the ocean with a surfboard and catch a wave.
That's right.
It's incredible.
That's right.
So why London? And yeah.
Well, my dad got transferred over there. He was in the oil and gas business. So we moved up. That was just a better location for him to go to the Middle East and the rest of the world, basically. So
How many years were you in London?
almost 3, a little under. Yeah.
And then back to Texas after
To
that?
Houston.
To
Yeah. I
Houston.
went to high school in Houston, Baylor, undergrad, SMU Law School.
What's a takeaway from London that maybe Scott and I don't have from non-London high school? You were junior high and high school pretty much there?
I went to an American school, though.
Okay.
So, the tube into school every day.
Yeah.
So that was when, I don't know if my parents were trying to get rid of me. It was when the IRA was blowing things up. So,
But they just kept dropping y'all off at the tube.
somehow managed my way through it. But, it was a great experience. Over there, you don't really need a car. So it's, but we would take trips every weekend, go somewhere. And, it was great experience.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I do. Two younger sisters.
Okay. So were all 3 of y'all getting on the tube and going to school?
They went to English schools. I think eventually we may have all went to the American school, but I guess they might have gone all the way through. I don't remember, quite honestly, but I don't remember them being I was alone on the tube.
You might want, your mom and dad still living?
Yes, they are.
You might want to call them and say, was there something there, that unresolved conflict we need to kind of figure out? Because where were my sisters at this time? Are they older or younger?
They're younger. Yeah, both younger. So they might not have been at school, or it might not have been as big a deal. I don't remember.
So what was like the one thing that you remember about that 2 or 3 years living in London that stuck with you all these years?
Oh, that's a good question. Just traveling. We traveled, like I said, almost every weekend.
The access you had to
a trip, and mainly around, in the countryside of England, going to different towns. But that was it, and it's overcast a lot.
Yeah.
But England's wonderful. You know, especially London. I mean, there's just so much to see. And that so much history, and given the, you know, in prior time, colonial period, et cetera, there was a lot.
Do you find that helps you in business at all?
No, I mean, it you know, gives me maybe a little bit different perspective, but I wouldn't say that it really helps.
Baylor and then SMU Law School. Do you know you wanted to be a lawyer early on?
No, I went to Baylor to be pre-med, and I have a degree in biology and a master's in gerontology. So it was probably that. I grew up. My dad, as a business guy, actually hated lawyers, so that was probably the last thing I wanted to be. But they had how it came about. They had started talking about socializing medicine, and then Baylor offered me a scholarship to do this gerontology program. It was one of 3 programs like that in the nation, and the med schools liked it at the time. And so part of the program was interning with some orthopedic surgeons in Waco. There were the Baylor's football team, orthopedic surgeons. And so, and that was an incredible experience. I mean, I got to see some really interesting things. But I asked, I think the group was 7 doctors. I asked each of them individually, hey, would you do this all over again? And every single one of them said no.
Seriously?
Yeah. So that kind of made me reconsider things. And my dad was not happy. And he goes, you better figure something out quick.
So you did your 4 years at Baylor, and then was this right after?
This was right after. It was a year program.
Okay.
I finished that. And then, you know, really, what do you do with other than go to med school? Law school was one of the, you know, options. And then I kind of gravitated towards M&A right away. And
so it wasn't necessarily, obviously, all those doctors told you they'd be lawyers, but just through your kind of journey, that seemed like a good fit potentially for why? What was it? A particular reason that thought, oh, I'll be good at that, or I'll enjoy that?
Well, I always was very interested in deals and mergers and acquisitions. So that's kind of why I gravitated maybe towards law, because that was the one thing that you could do with a biology degree, to be honest.
Kind of find yourself a little bit accident in law school. Once you got there, it sounds like you really clearly knew which type of law you wanted to pursue.
So why SMU at that point?
Well, they had a good transactional program. Mm-hmm. So that's, and Dallas was one of the cities that I was probably most interested in. So again, it's just easier to get a job, I think.
Coming from a Houstonian, that's you didn't want to go back to Houston.
I'm not one that has big on the rivalry between the two. I think they're both great cities for different, reasons. And
they are.
I enjoyed my time for that matter, I've enjoyed my time in London. I've lived in New York. Every city has its own,
absolutely
good qualities.
Our family has a business in Houston. We've fallen in love with it. The diverse culture and so again, we live here.
The people are
incredible.
Really, really down to earth. Where sometimes Dallas can be a little pretentious, but Dallas has an energy that I love. I think it's a great business city. I think people are, here it's, what can you do for me? What can I do for you? It's not so much, good old boy network. And I like that.
Yeah.
So.
Well said. Tell us about your family.
Well, like I said, 2 younger sisters. One lives in Houston, and one lives in Columbus, Ohio. My parents are in the desert out in California, and but retired.
Married? You got a couple? Y'all?
Oh, my immediate family. Yes,
yeah.
I've got a wife from Danielle. She's from originally from Memphis, Tennessee.
Very cool.
And then 3 kids. A 20-year-old, sophomore at Baylor. Senior in high school, and then a 9-year-old.
All right, so you graduate SMU. Tell us about your first job.
My first job was for a couple years was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, doing corporate work, and then the corporate partner at the firm. It was a very prestigious firm, but smaller by today's standards, but had some great clients. And then the partner that I was working with, the one like true corporate partner, kind of became trustee for the Maybe Foundation, which is a big foundation. And so he was kind of semi-retired, and I found myself doing litigation and some things that which I enjoyed, but it's a lot different than what I had set out to do. And so after a couple of years, I came back down here, a Houston-based firm, and worked there, and then moved over after a year to Weil Gotshal, which is a big New York firm, second largest in New York, I think, at the time. And then I was with Weil Gotshal here and then in New York.
What led you to go to New York?
My boss and kind of mentor in Dallas Tom Roberts became head of the corporate section at Weil. And so he started bringing a lot of Dallas people to New York. After, him asking me a few times to go up there, I decided to do it. And it was a great experience.
Yeah. How old were you and how old were your kids at that point?
I was single.
Oh, you're still single. Okay, perfect.
Not married.
Yeah.
And
it's a good time to do it.
No kids. Yeah.
What are you learning about yourself? What are you learning about the law profession? What are those first life lessons that are
at Weil, that there's always another gear. They work you very, very hard, and you just have to keep pushing yourself. Yeah. And it was great experience, and your learning is just accelerated because you're probably doing 2 times, 3 times what. So, yeah. And when you learn like that, I think when you work like that, it really helps you learn at an accelerated rate because you're being able to compare and contrast different deals and why different terms may be in one deal and not in another, and what the leverage points are. And it was just a great experience.
The amount of reps you're getting is double. Did you find the workload or the pace with Dallas and New York similar or different?
Well, that's what I mean. When I was at the Houston firm, I couldn't have imagined myself working any harder than I was at that point. Then I got a call from a headhunter, and hey, Weil Gottschal's gone. I'm going, well, they can't possibly work more than I am now. And boy, was I wrong. Yeah. But they were offering like 3 times as much money. And I really enjoyed working at that firm. It was one of the best experiences of my life, the Houston firm. What an opportunity that was. And then when I went to New York, I kind of felt the same thing. I go, there's no possible way you can be working anymore. And again, I was very mistaken. I mean, it was like Thursday was the hump day, it was a lot.
Yeah, so same company, but it was still more intense in New York than it was in Dallas.
Yeah.
You think it's still
is it still true today? Probably. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's just a different pace. I mean,
It's what you do.
Yeah. But it was good. And when I left and decided to start my own firm, they were very instrumental in helping me. So it's a really good experience.
Tell us about that, Shane. We want to definitely sit there for a minute. Had you been thinking about it for a long time? Obviously, on Decision Points, our primary audience are people who mostly have started a business. So what led you to it? Walk us through that journey.
It's a Sunday morning, and I wake up, asleep at my desk, and I was literally going, I've got to, I was probably in my early 40s, single. I wanted to have a family, and I go, I've got to make, overweight, bags under my eyes, but I had a rule that, don't ever quit a job till you have a new job, and but it's just impossible to do there because you're always have 3 or 4 deals going at a time. And so I finally got a small little break. My parents were living down in South Florida at the time, which is an easy flight. I flew down there and said, I'm thinking about making a change. And I was kind of burned out.
They took one look at you and they were like, yeah, you need to make a change.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of got
the LLC right now or whatever. Right.
So
I got their blessing and then, let Weil know. And they were very, gracious. And
so you literally woke up on a Sunday morning, you'd fallen asleep, obviously working all night or whatever. And you're like, this is
my friends they'd have a game that they would play, where they would call me at 2 or 3 in the morning and see if they could catch me not being at the office, and rarely was that the case. It was a lot, but and it's when you're younger, you can do that, but as you get older, when you're going, back to back all nighters, your body takes longer.
The recovery yes,
it does. So it's you start feeling it more.
What do you take from maybe those? How many years were you with Wild? 7 or 8. Okay, what do you take from that, and how has it benefited you? How has it benefited you?
Well, I think, again, I felt like there were various steps where I thought in my career, I can't possibly work harder, and you realize there's a next level and a next level. So you learn how to push yourself, and what I think, and then Weil was fantastic, and they're just, some of the most competent, best lawyers around. So you're learning from really, really good people. You're learning how to do things right, attention to detail, a high level of competency. And then, just work ethic, I think. So, and learning how to do things the right way from a legal transactional standpoint.
Yeah. You learned how to run a legal business.
So I want to go back to something you said a second ago. You said, okay, I woke up on Sunday morning, something needed to change. I flew to Florida to see mom and dad. And then did you say that you asked them what they thought and they said, we think that's a good idea? Or were you just going there to retreat and get away?
No, I wanted to, run by what I was planning on doing.
And you're 40 at this point?
Yeah, probably in my early 40s.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And talk about that. Like with mom and dad.
Well, that was fine. They were, I explained it to, the situation, and that, hey, I'm never going to be able to, again, I think our rule, and maybe it came from my dad, and that's why I was seeking his permission or blessing, however you want to call it. But don't quit a job till you have your next one lined up.
Which generally makes sense.
Which makes sense, but it just never,
But it's not always right.
Yeah. And it's just, there was never a break. I mean, like, you could never go find another job because when you're working like that. I mean, I think I had 6 straight months that year of 300 plus hours billed. So that, if you figure 160 is, 40 hours a week, that's double that. That's double that.
Yeah.
It's almost every hour you're awake, you're working. So it makes it kind of impossible. But they were nice. They understood, and I really didn't have a plan either, which was kind of scary. But it was like, I felt like I had to do it. So
when you got started, was it just you, or did you grab a couple of other guys and
get started back into law
on your own?
So I didn't really know what I was going to do. So I was talking to some people about maybe getting into real estate, and then how I was down. When I moved back, I moved down to Austin, Texas, and boy, is that a difference between
So real quick,
New York, Manhattan.
New York, you wake up Sunday morning, asleep at the desk. You go to Florida. How long are you in Florida?
Just for the weekend.
Okay.
Yeah.
You decide to move to Austin.
I don't remember when that decision was made. I decided to quit, got my parents, the blessing on that, and then, gave notice, and I waited till I wrapped up everything I was working on, and then,
trying to figure it out.
Headed down to Austin, and, was talking to some people there, and then I think I was probably there less than a week, and Weil, New York called and said, "Hey, we've got a deal that's too small for us. It's all they can pay is $150,000, and it needs to be done in 2 weeks." And it's out in San Francisco. So I said, well, I can do that.
Yeah.
That's not too bad.
That math works.
That math works just fine.
Yeah.
So I did it. It was a pain in the, proverbial butt, but we got it done. And I had a few clients of mine that were from Dallas that, I had the private equity firms that I had done all their work for. And so and they were, usually their deals, a lot of lead time, and they were very manageable. So not like your typical Weil Gotshal deal. And so I still do their work today, or have, some of my colleagues and I do it. And that's been great. It's been I guess I'm close to a 30-year relationship with them. So
right.
So that kind of got me started. And then while both in New York and in Dallas, just started sending me over, sending deals
stuff.
over, and the rest is kind of history.
Like, I know you were doing project work. But then when you said, all right, no, I'm going to hang a shingle and take space.
We had a small, there were 4 of us when we started the firm, and we had a small little stop at another firm, and then so there were 4 of us that started, and then that quickly grew. And so
describe Egan Nelson to us today. What's it? Yeah.
So we are a boutique, law firm that we have about 50 lawyers. Everybody that we hire is an ex-big firm lawyer. So I think that makes us relatively unique in the marketplace. We're transactionally focused. So we do have a couple of litigators, and then we have the bulk of our lawyers are corporate lawyers, so with somewhat different focuses. In Dallas, we tend to be more private equity focused, so we represent private equity firms and their portfolio companies. Austin is more, they have some of that, but they also do what we call an ECVC group, which is emerging company venture capital. They represent the VC firms in a couple of instances, but most of their work is representing the company. And then we have tax, corporate finance, insurance regulatory. We do a lot of insurance M&A work, mergers and acquisitions. And then in Houston, the focus is more on energy transactions. And then we have lawyers in New York and Seattle and a couple of other, Philadelphia, a couple other cities scattered about.
Y'all growing.
We are. We are.
Yeah. Exciting.
It is.
Exciting.
So how much of your time is spent managing the firm and how much is spent practicing law?
Well, up until about a year ago, virtually no time was spent managing, and now I've kind of assumed that role. So I'm a great deal of I would say probably north of 80% of my time is spent managing the firm now. But that hopefully won't be for too much longer. I kind of want to turn that back over to a non-lawyer administrative person. So
how'd that, between the leadership there, how did y'all come to that? Again, the audience here, so many business owners. How did you come to that? You were the person to do that? Was that an easy decision? Was it a conversation? Y'all did it overnight? You talked about it over a couple of years? How'd that process play out?
We had, well, traditionally, I wasn't really actively involved at all, or not, I don't want to say at all. Like major decisions, I would be involved with, but I didn't do the day to day. And my focus mainly was, practicing law and really business development were probably the 2 biggest things. And then my partner Tom Nelson was, ran the firm and was in charge of day to day. And then I guess in the last 2 years, 18 months, I've kind of roles have not switched, but I've been more active on the admin, and it just worked out. It seemed like it was time, I think he was kind of tired of doing it, and I was, we thought it'd be good to change things up a little bit and get a fresh set of eyes on stuff. So,
love it.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to transition here and really start to move into our business owners. And this is our masterclass crash course on legal advice is expensive, and really good legal advice is generally more expensive. This is an opportunity for a lot of owners and leaders to get some great basics from you. Let's roll. When should a business owner engage with you as the essentially mergers and acquisition attorney.
Yeah. So you want to do that early. So early is before you start the sales process. And certainly do not, one of the things we say all the time is do not sign a letter of intent, an LOI, MOU, whatever you want to call it, before you have your M&A lawyer look at it. Why you want to have your M&A lawyer look at that beforehand is so you don't get locked into certain provisions that, may not be market. You want to get their counsel then. If a provision is in the LOI, it may be impossible or very difficult to get it out, especially, or if you do get it out, you're going to a lot of times pay for it that you otherwise wouldn't need to. As a seller, oftentimes the best deal you're going to have is in the LOI. So it can only get worse is one way of looking at it. And also, if you want a provision, there are certain provisions that if you want them, you better ask for them in the LOI because it's going to be hard to get them if you don't.
So one of the things I hear often is, the LOI, it's non-binding. So, you don't really have to, it doesn't all have to be buttoned up and super tight.
Yeah, I would strongly disagree with that. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find any M&A lawyer that would agree with that statement. So that's being naive in my opinion.
And why? I think this is one of those things we get into. There's a business owner, they might be doing $100 million in revenue right now, but their day job is not selling a business.
Yeah, and they don't know. And there's certain provisions that are, as a business owner, you're just, unless you're engaged in the business of buying and selling companies, you're not going to know what the market terms are on certain things. And especially if you're dealing with a highly acquisitive strategic buyer who's in or even more so a private equity firm, I mean, they're going to know what market is.
Yeah, they have a playbook. They've got the experience. They've got the reps. So as a business owner, when should I know who you are?
Again, before the process starts, and I think that's important too. There's other reasons, because you can have at the beginning of the process, essentially what you'll have a lawyer, M&A lawyer do that's representing you is due diligence on your own company. So you kind of have your lawyer prepare the business for sale, which, help you with the data room, make sure all your documents and records are in order. So when you present them to buyers, some of the warts have been taken care of or issues that the business owner may not think it's a big deal, but we're going to go, hey, a buyer's going to have a problem with this. There's some things that we can do to make this look better. And just having your records in order, it sends a message to buyers that, hey, this is a really well-run professional company. And, ultimately that may get you more in a sale.
So if a seller's represented by a banker, isn't a banker going to do a lot of that?
Yes.
So how do you work with the banker? Where's who does what in terms of getting, the data room?
Well, it depends. So if there's not a banker involved, then
you're going to be more involved.
We'll be more involved. If the banker's involved, then the banker can do a lot of that. Although a lot of times the banker's motivations are to get a deal done, and our being the M&A lawyers. Motivations are to protect our clients. So there's a little bit different interest, and you should, be mindful of that.
And in a transaction, both are valid. Yeah. Like, if it's a good deal, you want to get the deal done. Right. So you want the banker pushing on that, but you also need the attorney to make sure that you don't.
No. And we try to, just to be clear, I think we try to be very pragmatic and get deals done too, and practical. Sure. So that's one thing that we try to pride ourselves on is, there are a lot of lawyers like to fight about things that aren't very material, and I think drive the average business person crazy. So we are very cognizant of that and trying to get focus on only things that matter. But by the same token, we are still trying to protect our client, which again is a little different motivation from your banker.
So I'm a business owner, and I'm thinking, all right, I may potentially be positioning for a sale in the next couple of years. Do I hire a banker first? Do I hire an attorney first? Both at the same time and start the process together? How do I begin to think about that process?
I've certainly seen, I don't know that I have a preference on that or that, I've seen it both ways where that sometimes the banker gets hired first, sometimes we get hired first. There's and I don't know that there's necessarily a right way or a wrong way. Someone else that should be thrown into that mix is a business advisor, financial advisor you'd want to consult early, especially if it's on retirement planning or things like that, or maybe an estate planning lawyer could be involved in that process.
Part of what we've put together at True North is this pre-transaction planning offering, and it has 4 pillars to it. 2 of the pillars are personal, so personal side of the balance sheet, and 2 of the pillars are really more related to the business. The 2 personal pillars are a coaching element. So after you sell your business, what's life look like, and what are you going to do for 40 hours a week for the next 30 years or whatever. And then there's a wealth planning component, which is exactly what you're talking about, which is let's look at the retirement picture, let's look at the tax picture, let's look at your estate structure. If you're charitably inclined, there's some strategies that we can look at. And then on the business side, there's sort of a valuation piece. How do we maximize the value for the business? And then there's a sort of a business consulting or organization piece. How do we make the business look pretty from a management and organization perspective? So you're sort of touching on some of those pillars. Deal team would be attorney, banker, tax advisor, wealth advisor, estate planning attorney, potentially. Anybody else?
Accountant. And if there's not a banker, there, some of it depends on the size of the business. So sometimes there might be a business broker if there's which is a little bit different than your banker. Like on some smaller deals, you may have a business broker involved, and if a business broker's involved, there may be more of a need to get a lawyer involved sooner because they may do less than a banker would do, and in terms of setting up the data room or identifying and covering issues beforehand.
What's the 1 or 2 biggest mistakes you've seen business owners make? Obviously, other than maybe signing an LOI before, but just as you've evaluated so many businesses, what are 1, 2, or 3 kind of pitfalls that business owners have tend to fallen into from your perspective?
I don't know that it's a mistake, but deals have their own cadence to them, and they're often very choppy. So I would counsel, seller clients that, kind of expect the unexpected. There are going to be, on a typical deal, there'll be multiple instances where, starts and stops are common, where that we think that there's a deal killer issue. I mean, 99% of the time, those deal killer issues get resolved. But there should also be some patience in resolving them. I mean, because there's usually going to be more than one, and you don't want to get pressured to resolve them maybe too quickly. And both sides usually want to get a deal done. So a lot of times there's, hey, I think a sense, I'll just, cave on this and we'll get it done. But there's another issue. So, and some of it depends on the buyer. You have to kind of read the situation, and that's not always the case. But
yeah, what do I need to be focused on that a buyer? Where's the spotlight gonna come on my business?
Well, it depends. So, I mean, I guess first of all, what is diligence? So, due diligence. That's basically where the buyer does an investigation of your business and the company, the target company. And ideally, as I said before, you would want your attorney, your M&A attorney, hopefully has done some diligence on the company to start with. And so maybe they've identified some issues, and then you've kind of resolved them before the buyer begins the process. But typically the process is going to begin with the buyer or the buyer's counsel sending a due diligence request list, which is going to be a real detailed, it somewhat depends on the business, but there's going to be a financial aspect to it, a corporate organizational aspect to it. It may cover intellectual property, basically all of the major assets and then liabilities of the business. They're going to try to identify and make sure that the corporate records are in good, proper order. So they may cover licenses and permits, real estate, if that's a significant portion of the assets, material contracts, insurance, things like that. So typically the seller would receive that request list, and then they would set up a call with counsel and go through, make certain documents available to the buyer, and then go through it, answer any questions that they may have. ERISA, personnel matters, or a couple of other topics that would be common. And the buyer may want to talk to your customers and suppliers. Some of this information you may not want to provide right away because it's very sensitive, and you don't want to get buyers that are just fishing and trying to see what your secret sauce is. So some things may not be divulged or provided until there's more deal certainty and you feel like you have a locked up deal. Like if there's a secret formula or trade secrets, those probably aren't going to be divulged early in the process. I would not recommend typically talking to customers or suppliers or maybe rank and file employees until there was more deal certainty. Again, it depends on the deal, but those are things to be mindful of.
Do you feel like when you're in a situation advising a client and these kinds of things are coming up, do you feel like there's tension between the banker who may want to share more and the lawyer who may want to say, no, let's wait? Or are you guys typically...
Sometimes, but I think more often than not, we're on the same page with the bankers on that. They get that, yeah.
What types of buyers are there for businesses? What kind of categories do they generally fall into? Yeah,
I would say, generally speaking, there are two types of buyers. There's strategic buyers, which are operating businesses. It may be one of your suppliers or competitors. And then there are financial buyers, which are like private equity firms or venture capital firms that are people that are businesses that are engaged in the business of buying and selling companies.
What's a pro and con? One's not better than the other. What's the pros and cons of each of those?
On the strategic side, sometimes they're in a position to offer a better price because there's some synergies and cost savings that they can extract in the combined business. For example, they may have their own management team, so they may not need existing management, which could also be a downside, right? If you were selling and wanted to stay on, that could be a negative. Also, that can also be true though with private equity firms. A lot of private equity firms now have their own management teams and different industry segments, if you will, or consultants or things like that. Another potential downside on the strategic side is that could trigger antitrust concerns. So again, depending on the size of the deal and what the buyer and the target's, market share is, that could, there may be a regulatory process and there's some expenses and time that it takes to go through that if you have to file for what's called a Hart-Scott-Rodino, antitrust approval.
Yep.
Financial buyer side, a lot of times they like, especially if management is continuing, they will often structure the deal where they want you to take a form of the consideration and equity in the new entity. So that's called rollover equity. So, which again can be good or bad, but.
Yeah, I want to get into that in a minute. But.
Do you have an opinion on that? Could be good or bad?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think if you're staying in, I think it tends to align the buyer and seller's interest. If you're the buyer, I know we're focused more on selling here, but it allows you to have to come up with less cash, but usually it's a smaller percentage, but it still could be material.
So many business owners think it's all or nothing. I either own all of it or I sell all of it. From your experience, what are the 2 or 3 or 4 most common scenarios, and maybe a brief editorial on each one of those? Does that make sense? I sell it all. I'm a rollover. I'm a part-time. I'm a consultant. Talk to the business owner that may not necessarily be a zero-sum game. I sell it and I walk away the next day.
Now, there may be, usually with, again, I'm generalizing because there's always exceptions. But
exactly.
But generally with strategic buyers, they're going to want to buy 100%. So that may be true. But on the other hand,
generally that would mean the owner is probably out.
It could be. It depends. Like if they're both making widgets, then they probably don't, and they feel like, hey, we know how to do this, and they probably don't need the seller to stay on. But if it's a different market, if there's different customer relationships, in that situation, they may want the selling owner to stay on, but maybe not as an owner any longer, just in some sort of consulting, or they may enter into an employment agreement or a consulting agreement where they learn, that owner may have some ways of doing things that they find as an operational improvement. Mm-hmm. Or it may be, like I said, a relationship with a really important customer that is material to them. And so there may be reasons for them to stay on. And then on the financial side, the financial buyer side, I guess you have the same considerations, but more often, I think in my experience anyway, on the financial side, you will, have the selling owner stay on. Not always, because again,
generally with an equity position still.
Yeah, and then I think that's probably the most common scenarios to have the rollover equity position. But again, that isn't always the case. So if a private equity firm if the target entity is going to be their what's called a platform acquisition in a case, then typically, unless they have an existing management team that they bring, in that industry segment, they will, usually keep management on. If, however, the acquisition is what we call a tack-on or a follow-on investment, then that may be less so. But they could stay on, so it just depends, And again, there's a lot of the same reasons why you may have someone stay on an employment or consulting relationship could be applicable on the financial buyer side as well.
Yeah, sure.
Can you think of a time or a transaction, no names, of course, but just where the whole process went really, really smoothly. The owner exited. They were in a great spot, super happy. Everything just went perfectly, and maybe why it went perfectly. And where you, as the lawyer, look at it and go, man, I wish I was that guy.
Yeah. Well, that happens a lot. Yeah. There's always bumps along the way, but I think a lot of times, I think it is with owners that maybe this is their second or third time to sell a business. They kind of know what to expect. I think they're a little more calm. They have the company
they've done
is
it
in
before.
order, right?
Yeah.
So they've kind of have the data room set up well in advance. All the I's are dotted, T's are crossed. There's some things that in the diligence process that like a common thing that's looked. I think that the buyers like to see are like proprietary information agreements, for example, that all the employees have signed, where they, agree to be bound by confidentiality provision, or if it's in an area where there's a lot of IP, that there's an invention assignment. So there's no question who owns the IP. That's very important. I think because this isn't their first rodeo, so to speak, they know to get this stuff and get it in place, and then keep signed copies of every and their house is in order. Right. Whereas on sometimes with first time founders, they're just they're young, they're just trying to get the deal done. You're trying to save money and cut corners, and because that's maybe the financially wise thing to do at that time, and but sometimes down the road that can cause you problems. And
maybe a little bit more emotionally involved in that company if it's their first time.
Yeah, could be.
What I take away from that is certainly so many times, me included, I often think the business owner that we're wanting to serve here at Decision Points is almost that business you started at 27 or 8, 9 years old and you took it to 55 and sold it. What I hear from Shane say, his best experiences were the second, third, fourth time.
Mm-hmm. It's super exciting on that first exit for a founder when it's kind of been their baby that they started as a 20-year-old and sold it, and that's in many ways that's more meaningful,
it's highly rewarding
and highly rewarding for I think the lawyer to see them an exit and do really well on it. So, whereas, if somebody's done it 3 times already, that's great for them, but it's their third time.
Right.
And,
there's an emotional component with the first sale, first time, where it's like, they're toasting and having a big celebration. After the third time, they just go home and, open a bottle of wine and,
The first time might be bumpier because they may not have all the ducks in a row, all the due diligence, and that may go with generally the harder things are, the little bit more rewarding they are, where it becomes a little bit more transactional. If you had 3 minutes with a business owner and we meet, we're on an elevator, it's a tall elevator, and we got 3 minutes, and you're going to say, Scott, Doug, as your unhired lawyer, but as your friend, before you consider selling your business, give me 1, 2, 3.
I guess number one would be don't during the process, don't feel compelled to agree to things without talking it over with your advisors, whether that's your attorney, your accountant, your financial advisor. Don't be rushed into pressured into making decisions. So I think if size, I guess, take several months usually to complete from start to finish, and there's a process, and you should never feel rushed, and there's always time to discuss, and don't feel like you need to commit too quickly, or certainly if you feel pressured to into anything, that's probably time to pull back and reflect and consult with your advisors.
And that's the value of having somebody like you in the seat, because you can be a buffer for that.
Absolutely.
Yes. And it's very emotional for the seller, and you can say, hey, look, let's just sit on this for a few days.
And again, the objectivity, the reps that you would have versus
lack of emotion,
and let the lawyer, oftentimes is hired to be the bad guy. I mean, we're usually comfortable.
You're pretty good at that.
You've had some reps being the bad guy.
Right. So and so you don't. Well, some sellers are not comfortable with doing that, and especially in like if you're in a sale to a strategic and you're going to be staying on, and that guy may be your boss, and you may not want to do that. So use your lawyers wisely and let and that doesn't mean the lawyer has to be an ass, but right. You can still make your points and explain where you're coming from and not be overly disagreeable.
It's really well said. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to ask you this question. I'd love for you to answer it. We definitely can strike it if you decide to strike it. Let's say I run a $50 million business. About what cost? I know it's value. Does it normally, bell curve, to engage an M&A attorney to get me through a transaction? What's a range? I think a lot of our business owners are out there thinking,
I want to wait as long as I can to hire that guy, because then the meter starts. And so
100% the meter starts. And then you're going to say, yeah, but every meter hour you don't pay me, you probably potentially hurting the value. Help guy.
Well, you should. That's almost impossible to answer. I mean, I get asked that, I won't say daily, but probably multiple times a week.
Today you got asked.
I know. But I mean, from prospective clients. So they want to know, which is a perfectly legitimate question. But I need to see what the terms are. I think that, because they can be all over the place. And if you have, and then a lot of it has to do with how difficult is the buyer, how difficult is their counsel? I mean, are they, hiring, a firm out of New York that wants to fight about, and I'm not, picking on New York law firms, because we deal with them probably more than anybody, but it's, some lawyers, some opposing counsel can be very practical and deal oriented, and then you can have others that are not. Or maybe the worst case is where you have, and it's typically not on. It's more on this is me being on the buyer's side and representing. And so opposing counsel would be on the seller's side, but you have very unsophisticated counsel, and they probably will drive up the cost more than, it depends on the deal, but they can often know what
to ask,
or on the buy side, you may be preparing the documents that normally, like disclosure schedules that are normally prepared by the seller, but because they don't know what they're doing, you're preparing them. So,
is there any percentage? Is it 1%? Is it 0.5%? Is it 0.25%? Have you found any trend in a business?
You'd have to really see the terms, and I know that's probably not the answer that
it's a terrible answer.
I know, but
it's a terrible answer.
But I will say we do try to get prospective clients an answer to that quickly in the process. And one thing that I think is, I think a seller should talk to multiple M&A lawyers and try to get some sort of commitment, and then be careful, because some fees will get way out of whack, and sometimes lawyers will, lowball you and then send you a bill for 3 times. I mean, we try to not do that. So I would overestimate a little bit on the front side, maybe, but I will stick by my estimate. There's a caveat. If we think we're going to get the deal done in 2 months, and 8 months later we're still working on it, I would just ask that the client be mindful, be appreciative of that. But most, I would say 95% of the time we're within the target that we tell them. And I think the other thing, there are questions you can ask, like, what's your hourly rate? Will you flat fee the deal? This is maybe one of the most important ones is not necessarily what the hourly rate is, although that is important, but how many lawyers are you going to staff on the deal? I mean, so many times we staff things generally 2 or 3 corporate lawyers, and then, we'll have other experts involved depending on who's needed. But a lot of times the other side will have, 5, 6, 7 or more corporate lawyers, so that when you have that many lawyers, your bill starts adding up quickly.
Yeah. Not just hourly, but how many times that hourly. You took the last question out of my mouth, and that was, I'm a seller. What are the 1, 2, or 3 interview questions I should ask?
No, I think that's probably it. I think if you interview multiple corporate lawyers, I would ask them about what their experience is, how many deals have they done. I would try to stay away from There are times where having a lawyer that's kind of a jack of all trades is not a bad thing, but in the M&A process, I would focus on somebody who does that every day, day to day. You're just going to get a better result 9 times out of 10. I mean, they'll know what market is,
Yep.
And
thank you for choosing to spend your time, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, wherever else. Incredibly grateful, Shane, for sharing a lot of hours of expertise and wisdom for free for the business owner listening to Decision Points.
thank you for having me.
Of
Thanks,
course.
Shane.
Thanks for being here. Have a great rest of the day.